As the moonlight spilled across the city, Zola's heart fluttered with excitement, her lips brushing against another man's in a moment of passion. Far away, Kofi sat alone, his mind racing with the truth he never saw coming. The woman he loved had found solace in someone else's arms. His heart shattered in silence, unaware that the night would soon reveal a betrayal deeper than he could ever imagine. The sun was setting over the college campus, casting a golden glow on the baobab tree that stood at the heart of the grounds. Its massive trunk and sprawling branches had witnessed generations of students, their dreams, and their heartbreaks. Kofi adjusted his guitar strap and sat on the roots of the baobab tree. The instrument was old, its wood worn from years of use, but it was his most prized possession. Music was his escape, his way of expressing emotions too deep for words. As his fingers strummed the strings, a soft melody filled the air, blending with the sounds of crickets and distant laughter. "That's beautiful," a voice said, breaking his concentration. Kofi looked up to see a girl standing a few feet away. She was dressed in a colorful kitenge dress, her hair braided into intricate patterns. Her eyes sparkled with curiosity, and her smile was warm and inviting. Thank you," Kofi replied, his voice barely above a whisper. He wasn't used to compliments, especially from someone so radiant. "I'm Zola," she said, extending her hand. "I've seen you around campus. You're always playing music or sketching in your notebook." "I'm Kofi," he said, shaking her hand. Her touch sent a jolt of electricity through him. "I like to create things. Music, art, stories. It helps me make sense of the world." Zola sat down beside him, her dress fanning out around her. "I love that. I've always wanted to be a journalist, to tell stories that matter. Maybe you can teach me how to see the world through your eyes." Kofi smiled. As the moon rose high in the sky, Zola stood to leave. "I'll see you tomorrow, Kofi. Don't forget to teach me that song you were playing." "I won't," Kofi promised, watching her walk away. Little did he know, this was the beginning of a love that would burn brightly but end in tragedy. The days turned into weeks, and Kofi and Zola became inseparable. They spent their afternoons under the baobab tree, where Kofi taught Zola to play the guitar and shared stories from his village. Zola, in turn, introduced Kofi to her favorite books and encouraged him to perform at the college's cultural festival. One evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, Kofi played a new song he had written for Zola. Zola listened with tears in her eyes, touched by the beauty of his words. "Kofi, this is incredible," she said when he finished. "You have such a gift. It's easy to write when I'm inspired by someone like you." Zola smiled, leaning her head on his shoulder. "I'm so glad I met you, Kofi. You make me feel like anything is possible." As the stars began to twinkle above them, Kofi and Zola made a promise to each other to always support one another's dreams and to never let anything come between them. But even as they spoke those words, a shadow loomed on the horizon, threatening to tear them apart. The new semester brought with it a wave of change. Among the new arrivals was Jabari, a senior with a reputation for charm and success. He was tall, confident, and always impeccably dressed, his presence commanding attention wherever he went. It didn't take long for Jabari to notice Zola. He was drawn to her energy and ambition, and he made it his mission to win her over. He began showing up at her favorite spots on campus, striking up conversation and complimenting her on her work. "You have a real talent for storytelling," Jabari said one afternoon as they sat in the campus cafe. "You should consider joining the college newspaper. I'm the editor, and I'd love to have someone like you on the team." Zola was flattered by his attention. "Thank you, Jabari. I've always wanted to be a journalist. This could be a great opportunity." As the weeks went by, Zola found herself spending more time with Jabari. He introduced her to his world of parties, networking events, and high-profile connections. Kofi noticed the change in Zola. She was often too busy to meet him, and when they did spend time together, she seemed distracted. Zola sat on the edge of her bed, staring at her phone. Jabari had just texted her, inviting her to a party at his off-campus apartment. She glanced at the framed photo on her desk. At Jabari's party, Zola was the center of attention. Jabari introduced her to his friends, all of whom seemed impressed by her ambition and charm. He handed her a glass of wine and leaned in close. "You deserve to be here, Zola, with people who can help you reach your dreams." Zola smiled, but her mind wandered to Kofi. She wondered if he was waiting for her under the baobab tree. She pushed the thought away, focusing on the laughter and music around her. The next day, Kofi confronted Zola. "You didn't come yesterday," he said, his voice tinged with hurt. Zola hesitated. "I'm sorry, Kofi. I got caught up with something." "With Jabari?" Kofi's voice was sharp, and Zola flinched. "He's just a friend," she said quickly. "He's helping me with my career." Kofi looked at her, his eyes searching hers. "And what about us? What about our dreams?" Zola sighed. "Kofi, I care about you, but I need to think about my future. Jabari can help me in ways you can't." Kofi felt as though the ground had been ripped out from under him. He turned and walked away, leaving Zola standing alone. Weeks passed, and Zola's relationship with Jabari deepened. They spent almost every day together, and Zola began to see a future with him. She told herself that Kofi would understand, that he would want her to be happy. But deep down, she knew she was lying to herself. One evening, Jabari invited Zola to a party at his apartment. The room was filled with laughter, music, and the clinking of glasses. Jabari pulled Zola close, whispering in her ear, "You're the most beautiful girl here." Zola smiled, but her heart wasn't in it. She couldn't shake the feeling that something was missing. As the night wore on, she excused herself and stepped outside for some air. Meanwhile, Kofi had heard about the party from a mutual friend. He couldn't stay away. He needed to see Zola, to understand why she had chosen Jabari over him. When he arrived, he saw her standing on the balcony, her back to him. "Zola," he called softly. She turned, her eyes widening in surprise. "Kofi, what are you doing here?" "I needed to see you," he said, his voice trembling. "I needed to understand why you left me." Zola looked away, unable to meet his gaze. "Kofi, I'm sorry. I never meant to hurt you." "But you did," Kofi said, his voice breaking. "You chose him over me, over us." Zola's eyes filled with tears. "I didn't mean to, Kofi. I thought he could give me the future I wanted." Kofi stepped closer, his heart aching. "And what about the future we dreamed of together? What about the baobab tree and the songs we shared?" Zola shook her head, tears streaming down her face. "I don't know, Kofi. I don't know anymore." Before Kofi could respond, Jabari appeared, his arms slipping around Zola's waist. "Is everything okay here?" he asked, his tone protective. Kofi looked at Zola, waiting for her to say something, to choose him, but she remained silent, her eyes downcast. Heartbroken, Kofi turned and walked away, leaving Zola and Jabari standing on the balcony. Kofi's world crumbled after that night. He stopped attending classes, stopped playing his guitar, and stopped visiting the baobab tree. He spent his days in his dorm room, staring at the walls, consumed by his pain. Mama Nia, the elderly woman who ran the food stall near the college, noticed Kofi's absence. She had always been fond of the quiet, artistic boy who reminded her of her own son. One afternoon, she knocked on his door, holding a plate of his favorite food. Kofi, my child, she said gently, you haven't been yourself lately. What's troubling you? Kofi opened the door, his eyes hollow and his face pale. It's Zola, he said, his voice barely audible. She chose someone else. Mama Nia sighed, setting the plate of food on his desk. Love can be a painful thing, my child, but you must not let it destroy you. You have so much to live for. Kofi shook his head. I don't know how to move on, Mama Nia. She was my everything. Mama Nia placed a hand on his shoulder. You're stronger than you think, Kofi. Remember the baobab tree. It stands tall and strong. No matter the storms, you must do the same. Kofi nodded, but his heart was too heavy to take her words to heart. After she left, he sat on his bed, staring at the plate of food. He couldn't eat. He couldn't sleep. All he could think about was Zola and the life they had lost. One night, under the cover of darkness, Kofi returned to the baobab tree. He sat on its roots, his guitar in his hands, and played the song he had written for Zola. Kofi sat at his desk, a blank sheet of paper in front of him. The room was silent except for the faint hum of the ceiling fan. His hands trembled as he picked up a pen and began to write. Dear Zola, I don't know if you'll ever read this, but I need to say these words. You were my everything, my muse, my hope. When we met under the baobab tree, I felt like I had found a piece of myself I didn't even know was missing. You made me believe in love, in a future filled with music and laughter. But now, that future feels like a distant dream. I can't breathe without feeling the weight of your absence. I can't sleep without seeing your face, your smile, the way you looked at me when you thought no one was watching. I gave you my heart, Zola, and you gave it away to someone else. I don't blame you. I know you were chasing your dreams, and I couldn't give you what Jabari could. But it hurts, Zola. It hurts more than I can bear. I feel like I'm drowning, and no matter how hard I try, I can't come up for air. I hope one day you'll understand how much I loved you, how much I still love you. Maybe then you'll forgive me for what I'm about to do. Goodbye, Zola. Be happy. He picked up his guitar and walked out of the dorm, heading toward the baobab tree. The campus was quiet, the moon casting a pale glow over the baobab tree. Kofi sat on its roots, his guitar resting on his lap. He strummed a few chords, the melody soft and sorrowful. The song was one he had written for Zola. As he played, memories flooded his mind. The first time he saw Zola, the way her laughter lit up the room, the nights they spent under the stars, dreaming of the future. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a small bottle of pills. He stared at it for a moment, his heart pounding in his chest. Then, with a deep breath, he opened the bottle and swallowed the pills, one by one. As the world began to fade, Kofi leaned against the baobab tree, his eyes closing. The last thing he saw was Zola's face, smiling at him under the stars. The next morning, a group of students found Kofi under the baobab tree. His guitar lay beside him, and his face was peaceful, as if he was sleeping. The envelope with Zola's name was clutched in his hand. Word spread quickly, and soon the entire campus was in shock. Zola heard the news from Amina, her best friend, who burst into her dorm room, tears streaming down her face. Zola, it's Kofi, Amina said, her voice trembling. He's gone. Zola's heart stopped. What do you mean gone? He took his own life, Amina whispered. They found him under the baobab tree. When she reached the baobab tree, a crowd had gathered. She pushed through, her eyes falling on Kofi's lifeless body. The envelope in his hand caught her attention. She picked it up, her hand shaking as she opened it and read the letter. With each word, her heart broke a little more. By the time she finished, she was sobbing uncontrollably. "I'm sorry, Kofi," she whispered, clutching the letter to her chest. "I'm so sorry." In the days that followed, Zola was consumed by guilt and regret. She couldn't eat, couldn't sleep, couldn't focus on anything but the pain she had caused. She avoided Jabari, unable to face him after what had happened. One afternoon, Mama Nia found Zola sitting under the baobab tree, staring at the spot where Kofi had taken his last breath. The elderly woman sat beside her, placing a comforting hand on her shoulder. "You carry a heavy burden, my child," Mama Nia said gently, "but you must not let it destroy you. Kofi's death is not your fault, but it is your responsibility to honor his memory."